Welcome everyone to today's virtual talk at the USPTO on the remarkable life and legacy of Peter Cooper, a pioneer, entrepreneur, and visionary inventor, and an inductee of the Inventors Hall of Fame. The eve of National Eat Your Jell-O Day is the perfect time to explore Cooper's entrepreneurial journey, his significant contribution to the food industry, and the crucial role of intellectual property in protecting and promoting innovations. My name is Ron Mercado. I'm a member of the Eastern Regional Outreach Office, and I'm a patent examiner of over 10 years. I will be your host today, and joining me, we have three distinguished guests. We have James Edward Malin. He is the engineer and science librarian for the Cooper Union for the Advancements of Science and Art, and a food historian researcher. His food history scholarship has been presented to the Association for the Study of Food and Society, the Oxford Food Symposium, and the International Commission for Research into European Food History. It has also been published in Gastronomica, the Journal for Food Studies, and Eaton, the Food History magazine. Mary Mann is the archivist librarian at the Cooper Union for the Advancement of Science and Art. She has authored essays in The Atlantic, The New York Times, and The Believer, as well as a book, Yawn, Adventures in Boredom. She believes in the utility of investigating the past to better occupy the present and envision the future. And from the patent office, just like myself, we have Lawrence Taranzano here. He is the Director of Classification and Standard Development at the USPTO. He came to the USPTO back in 1995 as an examiner working in multi-layer plastic articles. He then joined the Technology Center 1700 under chemical engineering and manufacturing as a supervisor patent examiner, first overseeing patent related to textiles and chemistry of OLEDs, and later food. As part of the long-standing collaboration between the USPTO and the Smithsonian, Lawrence has written a number of food articles for the Smithsonian.com, including the patents behind the pumpkin pie, patents behind your box of Valentine's Day chocolate, among others, but he's probably best known for the article, Can Recipes Be Patented?, for the USPTO Inventors Eye. And with that, I'm going to let James and Mary take it away with the presentation on Peter Cooper.
Thank you so much, Ramon. So I'm James. I'm the engineering and science librarian at Cooper once again.
I'm Mary. I'm the archives librarian. We're going to pull up our slides.
Yes.
And start just talking to you about this cool guy, Peter Cooper, and Jell-O. Two things we love.
Can you see that okay?
Okay. So let's go on to the first slide.
Yeah,
let's do it. Who is Peter Cooper? Peter Cooper is a cool guy. He was born on Little Dock Street in New York City in 1791. Now it's called Water Street, if you've been down there. In a speech that he gave on his 84th birthday, he said, "When I was born, New York City contained 33,331 inhabitants." I don't know how he knows it that specifically. "The upper limits of the city were at Chambers Street, and not a single free school, either by day or night, existed." So from this statement already, you can tell like New York City developed just in leaps and strides through the 1800s, and so did Peter. As a kid, he lived at the whim of his dad. You know, this is what we do. We live at the whim of our parents, who dabbled in various businesses and frequently had money trouble. So Peter was often roped into helping the family make ends meet by doing things like finding and collecting wild honey to sell. He only ended up getting one full year of formal education. So throughout the rest of his life, as a manufacturer, an inventor, politician, he felt the lack of education. He wrote about it, he talked about it a lot. This led to him founding a free school for men and women of all races and religions in New York City called the Cooper Union. This is where we work now. It's been here since 1859. The Cooper Union was the accomplishment that Peter was most proud of, but he did so much more stuff. I won't get too into it because I could geek out for a long time, but he advocated for the creation of free and non-religious public K-12 schools. He played an instrumental role in revitalizing New York City's water supply. He gave a platform to abolitionists and labor activists in our Great Hall here in this building. He built the Tom Thumb to prove that steam engines could hack it in America. And he was even nominated for president by the Greenback Party. Peter was a lifelong New Yorker, and the wealth and power that he accumulated funneled right back into his community in a very real way that made him just like staggeringly beloved. His biographer wrote after his death in 1883, the busiest streets of New York through which the funeral procession passed on its way to Greenwood Cemetery beyond the East River were all closed to business and hung in black. The flags on all public buildings and on the ships in the harbor were at half-mast. The bells of all churches tolled. In New York City. It's bananas. So what remained constant for Peter throughout his life was his passion for inventing. This is why we're here today. For as long as he could remember, he was, as he put it, fussing and contriving, never satisfied unless I was doing something difficult, something that had never been done before, if possible. Just a beautiful statement about the joy of inventing. The first invention that he ever recalled making came to him when he was just a little kid. He was helping his mom do the family washing by pounding the clothes. He describes it as the soiled clothes were put in a barrel with soapy water and a wooden pounder with a long wooden handle was used. It was a tiresome way, and I thought I could make an improvement. So he did. His description of it is sort of convoluted, but it kind of sounds like a big wheel that you could turn to operate 2 pounders that would strike in a new place every time. I'm glad I have a washing machine.
Yeah.
Anywhere that Peter saw opportunity for improvement, he couldn't help but tinker, resulting in a dizzying array of patents. We have several copies here in our archives. They're beautiful. You know, they're on vellum. They're signed by like James Madison, Andrew Jackson. One of them is for a self-rocking cradle, which you can see here. It also had an attachment to whisk the flies away. He also patented a means of propelling canal boats by a series of endless chains. Improvements in the manufacturing of glue, which we'll talk more about, and the Tom Thumb locomotive. And he didn't just invent things, he patented them.
Yeah, and so obviously today we're here to talk about one specific patent. So gelatin has been around for a very long time. It's been around essentially since prehistory, but it has always been an incredibly arduous process. So one of the things that he one of the things that Peter Cooper saw as something needed to fix was the time and effort that it took to improve upon that. So in 1845, he filed this patent. It's 4084, called the Improvement and Preparation of Portable Gelatin. He describes the patent as this. The improvement which I claim as my invention consists in making a transparent, concentrated, or solidified jelly containing all the ingredients so combined, concentrated, or solidified that the article may be kept in a perfect state of preservation for any length of time, requiring only the addition of the prescribed quantity of hot water to dissolve it, when it may be poured into glasses or mold, and when cold may be fit for use. So I think that's kind of just a pretty convoluted way of describing what we know today as just regular gelatin, right? Like,
but it's so new.
Yeah.
The idea of preserving stuff like that.
And the way that we know gelatin, like this is really the creation that when we think gelatin, usually, at least here in America, we think of this powdered stuff. And this is really him describing this for the first time. So obviously the thing he was trying to solve, right, was he was trying to make making gelatin more convenient and more shelf stable, because it had been a extremely laborious process before that.
What was the process like?
Yeah, so Eliza Acton, who was a food journalist a little bit later, but in 1867, she described the process of making gelatin this way. Using a blunt-edged knife, scrape the hair from calves' feet after striking the hooves sharply on a table to remove them from the leg bones held tightly in the hand. Then you spend hours simmering, degreasing, clarifying the broth before filtering it through jelly bags or filtering stools to obtain a clear, bright transparency. So obviously the convenience of this portable gelatin, right, from a few years earlier, it's kind of right there. You don't have to deal with hair and bones and
breaking bones.
Yeah,
It's
yeah.
a gnarly process. So how did Peter Cooper get involved here?
Yeah.
Peter Cooper's business primarily consisted of glue and iron manufacturing. His primary passion was education. Why is he at the forefront of modern gelatin history? It's mostly just circumstantial. He opened his first glue factory in a field that would eventually become Park Avenue, and began developing relationships with local dealers in animal parts. So that's butchers, tanners, that kind of stuff. The same animal parts that produce quality glue also produce quality gelatin. His son-in-law and business associate Abram Hewitt said it best: "Where glue ends and gelatin begins, no man can tell." Yum. Peter already had everything he needed on hand to begin experimenting with gelatin production.
In fact, gelatin and glue, the glue of this type, so animal glues, they're kind of so similar, not just chemically, but like similar almost in the way that people spoke about them at this time, that even within patents, the two terms are kind of used interchangeably. So we found a few cases of this. 1894, Peter Cooper Hewitt, who was what, grandson? Peter Cooper Hewitt?
Yes.
Yeah, who was his grandson, filed for a patent called process of purifying glue. And at one point he calls the glue gelatin. There's another one from the same year for a drying machine that's meant for both glue or gelatin. There's one a few years later about from Obadiah Rich, who assigned it to Peter Cooper as well. That's also about glue, and he calls it gelatin. So like even in these official documents, right, they're using this term interchangeably. And so it's not just that they happen to be the same thing. Like in the mind, kind of, they are really the same thing.
Yeah. So Peter Cooper's gelatin required the boiling and refining of massive amounts of calf's feet. Just massive, carefully cleaned, freed from fat, and strained. In one of his patents, he calls this substance foot water / foot liquor.
Yum.
Yum. Because nobody wanted the taste of calf's feet in their desserts. Naturally, Peter carefully prepared and dried the jelly, and even this involved some invention on his part. One of his biographers, Edward Mack, writes, "So as to know the proper weather for freezing the gelatin before drying, he built a gelatin eagle, whose wings stood erect in dry weather when the gelatin, which absorbs moisture, shrank." I haven't ever been able to get my hands on an image of this eagle or model of it, but I would love to see any renditions anyone comes up with. The result was the first widely used packaged table gelatin in America. But it's important to note that it wasn't just the product that sold well, it was also the packaging. Peter Cooper, in many ways, had his wife Sarah to thank for that. You can see her here, giving him a great look. She authored the recipes that were printed on the packets. This remained a feature of Peter Cooper's gelatin branding long after both Peter and Sarah had died.
Thank you.
Yeah.
So like I mentioned before, gelatin has been around for a really long time. And it goes by a few different names in history. Aspic is another term that's used sometimes. Isinglass, there's a whole bunch of different words. Some of them mean slightly different things. But anyway, in whatever form, it's been used throughout time, and it's still in use today, right? So this is both in things like sweet desserts. We're super familiar with Jell-O, of course, and puddings, but also it's used a lot and has been used a lot in industrial manufacturing as an additive. It was a really important part of photography, pre-digital age.
Yeah.
Really important part of that. So it has a whole bunch of uses and had a whole bunch of uses for a long time. But the interesting thing is this patent, it's not necessarily for just like this chemical additive that was later turned into a sweet dessert. Like the patent that Peter Cooper filed, like literally describes the dessert we're very familiar with Jell-O, right?
He
So
essentially gives a recipe, right?
yeah, well, except you can't patent recipes, right?
Right.
Yeah.
Important.
Yeah. But in the patent, he says Cooper's 1845 gelatin patent does, he says for every 100 pounds of gelatin, 400 pounds of best white sugar, the juice of the juice or acid of 1,200 lemons, or the equivalent amount of limes for flavoring, and then also 1 pound of cinnamon, 1 pound of mace, 1 pound of allspice, a half pound of clove, etc. So obviously,
block party.
Yeah, it's obviously this is an industrial scale, right? But he's not just like you don't use mace and cinnamon for flavoring when you're making something that's going to one day be utilized as an industrial additive for emulsions, right? Like he really is describing this dessert. And a question that you might have been asking yourself up until now is like, why? Like, what's so important about gelatin? Why do we care, right? It's in a lot of things like I described, but it's not exactly like in front of us all of the time. And the answer to that, I think historically, is really that in especially the 19th century, it was kind of more in your face all of the time. The food historian Ken Albala says cultures that value technology on the table value aspects, right? And that's Jell-Os or gelatins. This is in part because of the period of the Industrial Revolution that we're in, right? And that period really imparts kind of important values and aesthetics onto the food industry of that time, that nascent industrialized food system. And what results is something that I like to describe as kind of, what results is something that I usually describe, I missed this, as homey science, right?
Yeah,
so
homey science.
Yeah, so it's kind of this wholesome and industrial economy, and this is resulting in the fact that of a few things, but the scientific part, right? It's dealing with some things that aren't necessarily pertinent today, and these things are like food scarcity, right? At this time, there's literally just less food in the world, right? So scarcity is a much bigger problem, right? And in food science at the time, applying this kind of applying science to economize the kitchen was really important.
The labor to make the things of the earth edible could be extreme.
Yeah. I mean, both on the industrial scale, and then this is also the period right before domestic science, right? Or right as that is being created. It's the application of science into economizing the way that we, in some ways, the way that we eat things, right? This also made sense in terms of making unpalatable things edible, right? Or using kind of new and unexpected things in ways that you might not have thought of before, right? And so, for example, this, like Mary was describing, the way where Peter was getting the carcasses from to make the Jell-O, it was kind of seen as refuse, right? And
oh, absolutely. Yeah.
And so it's very economical, right?
Like horses, driving carriages around town get too old, they kill the horse, they become glue.
Yeah.
Or gelatin.
Or gelatin, right?
Yeah.
So that's this kind of this kind of scarcity is important in food science at the time. Then there's also kind of adulteration, right? So this is well before Upton Sinclair wrote The Jungle, which is kind of often cited as the reason why the United States at least started the FDA, or what would later become the FDA, right? There's not a lot of regulation in the food system, and
You were telling me some examples the other day.
Yeah, like it was really common before the 20th century. It was really common to have things like paint in milk, right? Or chalk in flour and things like that that kind of stretched the dollar, right? And so this was kind of rampant in the food system at the time. And this also, the like cleaning up of this also kind of goes hand in hand with the morality at the time, right? The kind of common morality at the time, which are those Victorian morals, which kind of associates things like purity with goodness, right? And then the and that I think is exemplified by the like clarity of the aspect itself, right? So
Yeah.
Peter Cooper's gelatin is pure and clear, I think. Yeah, so purity and honesty, right? This word purity means both like the gelatin itself is pure, and so it's see-through, right? But it's also kind of this morality idea.
But it's a real beautiful, like aesthetic example of like, look how pure I can see through my Jell-O mold.
Yeah, yeah.
You know it's clean.
Yeah, and because of that, so the last thing I think that food science is dealing with a lot at the time is the idea of instability, right? So this is pre-refrigeration being really common, not a lot of means of transportation. Food goes bad all the time, and obviously food goes bad all the time today, right? But we have all of these kinds of scientific checks and balances, canned things and different things that were just being generated at that time. And I think that looking at something in Jell-O, even though it's not literally stable, right? Like Jell-O does kind of, like that eagle, it does kind of melt over time. It does kind of look like things are frozen, right? So I think that stability was something that was really important at this time. Yeah, did you want to add anything to that?
No.
Okay.
That was beautiful.
Yeah.
This is the branding. These are some examples of the branding for Peter Cooper's gelatin.
Yeah. So the branding, like I was saying, the branding, right? The saying that they associated it with it, or the slogan, was purity and honesty, right? And this was branding that associated this product very much with Peter Cooper himself, right? And obviously we're associating Peter Cooper with this. It's called Peter Cooper's gelatin. You literally have his face right on the package, right? But the product was really being associated with the same type of aesthetic that Peter had kind of cultivated for himself in his life. And that's kind of this purity and honesty thing. The way that Mary's described him to me in the past that I really like is an avuncular self-made man. You've described him once that way.
He is avuncular, like an uncle. Yeah.
And then my favorite one was like a sort of folksy grandpa of industry.
I mean, he was, I can't understate how beloved he was. If you guys remember what I just said about his funeral, like New York City closing down for this guy. Like, we're a big city. Even then we were a big city. He died in the 1880s. So he was so beloved. It's smart to use his image on the branding. He was beloved and he was super nice.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And if you trust him, you kind of get to trust this product, right?
I have yet to find anything about him that I don't like, which is really rare for an 19th century industrialist.
Yeah, seriously.
Yeah.
Yeah, and so along with that is this kind of idea that I described before of this kind of homey science aesthetic, right? So it's kind of this scientifically invented benevolence, right? And I know that sounds kind of weird, right? But if you think about it with some examples, you start to realize that you're actually really familiar with this idea. So think of like canned chicken soup, right? Like I was describing before. That was a scientific marvel, right? Louis Pasteur was not, had lived not that long before this. And so on a industrialized scale, creating these like shelf-stable food products. That was a scientific marvel. But at the same time, chicken soup, it's not sold as this like futuristic science thing, right? It's this homey, make you feel good.
Your grandma makes it.
Yeah, exactly.
So cozy.
So other examples are graham crackers, right? Quaker Oats as a brand. And then something called a meat biscuit that actually used to be really important. There are these things that this food historian named Lisa Haushofer calls wonder foods. They all kind of occur around this same period and have this same kind of aesthetic. And like Maren was saying, this aesthetic of Peter was really important even well after he died, just for the company itself.
Yeah, so he dies in 1881 and or sorry, 1883? No, I'm not remembering.
Yeah.
Hold up, because this is important, guys. He died in 1883. So he dies in 1883, but as you can see from the box all the way on the right here on this presentation, the patent is from 1897.
Yeah. So I'm gonna talk a little bit about this mystery that I'm going to describe, which is this little box. So there's a lot of sources. We found a lot of sources from everything from the New York Times to a few different like government websites, like federal government websites, well-researched things that describe Peter Cooper as not just the inventor of Jell-O, right, but literally the person who sold the patent to Pearl Waite in 1897 for Jell-O. Now, as I'm sure a few people on this call know, there's a few things that are wrong with that statement, right? And I'm going to talk a little bit about that because that idea that Peter Cooper, although he obviously created the thing that we think of as Jell-O today, he did not have any direct hand in the company or in the brand Jell-O. That happened way after he died and way after the patent no longer existed. I want to, this was some research that we did with Rebecca Oakes, who's the historian at the US Patent Office. She was very helpful with this. So essentially, I think what happened is the year on this package, on this specific box, which is kind of a rarity. There are not a lot of these boxes floating around, right? So I think this specific box was kind of important in this lore, right?
And this image of this box is a box in our archive.
Yes.
And I'm pointing because it's right behind me, the archive. But there's, maybe a handful of these in existence in the world.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I've only ever seen the existence of one other at all. But essentially, this box this packaging has this year patented September 14th, 1897. And that happens to be the same year that Jell-O, the brand, was
Launched.
Yes.
Yeah. The 1897 is the same year Pearl Waite says, "Hey, I got a product."
Yes.
Yeah.
Well, and trademarked. It was trademarked.
Yeah. Yeah.
Registered. Yeah. The mark was registered at that time, maybe.
Yeah. So, and as I'm sure, once again, a lot of people on this call could say, trademarking and patenting are not the same thing, right? These are different types of intellectual property. But it happens to just be that it's the same year on this package with a reference to a patent that Pearl Waite files this trademark. So I think,
is it just a wackadoo coincidence?
I think it's just a wackadoo. It might be a wackadoo coincidence. It might be a little on purpose, which I'll talk about in a bit. But essentially, we wanted to find out, okay, so we knew the original patent existed for Peter Cooper's gelatin, right? And we knew the trademark existed in 1897. What on earth is this patent statement talking about? And so what we did is we went into the archives, essentially, right? We used online archival research and looked through the patent gazettes, right? Thank you.
Yeah.
We looked through the patent gazettes sorry.
James is being nice. I actually didn't look through these gazettes at all. He's saying we, but James looked through the patent gazettes.
Yeah, so we looked through these things and absolutely by coincidence, just paging through them. Oh, I should probably describe what these are first.
Yeah.
Sorry. So the Patent Gazette is something that's been around since the very beginning of patents. It's a weekly published document that has all the patents that are published that week. That's my understanding of it. Anybody on this call can correct me if I was off a little bit. But essentially, we paged through. We knew the exact week, right? And so we paged through the week. And just coincidentally, I think I happened to open up the page one time and I recognized a name, which is J.C. Hewitt, right? And we haven't really described it much. You heard this name once so far, but Hewitt is actually a really important name to the Coopers, right?
Yeah, so Peter Cooper's son-in-law was Abram Hewitt. He was also Peter Cooper's business partner. He was a really big part of their family. The little slight sidetrack here, he became part of their family because he was tutoring Peter Cooper's son and they got shipwrecked together. So they became like really good friends because that's what happens when you get shipwrecked together. And then he marries his sister and he becomes business partners with his dad. You know, it's like a whole, he's part of the family. So Abram Hewitt, and then the Hewitt line goes on. His daughters, Abram Hewitt's daughters, started the Cooper Union Museum, which is now the Cooper Hewitt, run by Smithsonian. Abram Hewitt and his son were mayors. You know, they were everywhere.
Yeah, they were everywhere. They were
including in the Patent Gazette.
Yes, yeah. But the name is really important to this history too, because so I just happened to see this name Hewitt, and it gave me pause, and I looked at the patent and kind of looked closely at it, and realized that it could be describing. I mean, that box in the patent image doesn't look that different than the physical box that is here at the Cooper Union Archives. And so I kind of wanted to, and I couldn't really find anything else in the Gazette that possibly that statement could be referring to. And so I did a little bit of a rendering. I kind of blew up Hewitt's image. As you can see, I have some images there, and I kind of, because this was like a hand drawing, it wasn't exactly like equal, and so I kind of modernized it. You can see here on the right, and essentially I made, let me do that. I made what I think is a version of the box in that patent, which obviously expired a long time ago, right? And it looks quite a bit like the box that the gelatin is in. So we suspect.
Look at that box.
Oh yeah.
Can we?
Yeah.
I mean,
is it frozen? Here, wait.
Maybe. Sorry, guys. There you go.
There you go.
Yeah, you can see the box.
Yeah. So that's the box that I kind of rendered. I think it looks quite a bit similar, right? The thing that is really important about this patent is this little tab on the bottom right-hand side. You can see it described as C, F, and E. And it's this like extra little tab that gives the box some strength when it's closed. Now, the box that's here at the Cooper Union Archive, it is still sealed, right? As you can kind of see from the images, it's falling apart a bit, but it still has gelatin in it. It is unopened, and we're not going to open it to check to see if it's the box, but it does seem like it very well could be. So,
and it makes sense with the date, because like you were saying, his patent is from the 1840s, and at that time, this kind of patent would have only lasted what, 20 some years?
Yeah. So between 1836 and 1861, patents were only held for 14 years with a possible extension of an additional 7 years, right? And so the patent that we've been talking about today, the patent for portable gelatin, that would have absolutely expired by 1866 at the absolute latest. So there's no way that the patent on this box could be in any way referent to Peter Cooper's patent. Yeah, so we really think that this little, or it's probably much better looking on the screen, that little statement has caused a lot of misunderstanding about the history of Jell-O, the product, I guess, but also about how these things function together. And we think we kind of solved that mystery and put a little bit of a urban legend to bed.
Academic legend. Some serious people have spread this around, which is no shade. But I will say it doesn't, for me, doesn't make Peter Cooper's contribution any less. I think what you were saying about the way that people did have to make gelatin, and the importance of gelatin in the 1800s, like this is a big deal, a shelf-stable product that you can just have in your kitchen. To me, it sort of joins the cradle as like the self-rocking cradle he designed as sort of like, let's make life easier for, frankly, for women.
Yeah.
Let's do it.
Yeah.
It's hard. It's hard to be banging hooves against the table and rocking cradles all at the same time. Let's make some shelf-stable gelatin and some cribs. So with that, that's been the story of Peter Cooper's gelatin. Thanks for taking this jiggly journey with us. If anybody has any questions, you can ask them today, or you can always email us at archives@cooper.edu. If you're in the neighborhood, swing by to visit. We're at 7 East 7th Street in the East Village. And our archive is open to researchers. So we have all kinds of stuff, including, I just brought this out for fun and good times. We have a lot of actual sheets of pre-powdered gelatin.
There you go.
We have so many of these boxes, in fact, that James and I have talked about recording a demo of us trying to make gelatin from this Jell-O.
Yeah.
From this old gelatin.
It
So
does
if that happens, we'll keep you guys posted.
Yeah, it does really appear to be very, very shelf stable. So
Yeah.
it seems like it might still work. Like we don't know.
That's
We'll
amazing.
find a way to find out.
Yeah. Thank you so much, though. Thanks so much for having us.
Yeah.
No, thank you guys. You know, doing that experimental archaeology that you guys did with the box, you know, that is amazing. And now continuing that trend by actually using that gelatin to use it. I would love to see the result of that experiment.
We'll definitely let you know.
I think we have something here. Let me see. I don't see any questions on the chat. That being said, before Larry takes, I do have a few questions of my own, right? So you guys talked a little bit about commercialization and how the Sarah Cooper helped with that, right? So my question really is, can you give like a little overview, right, of how did IP, right, help commercialization during, or how was it during that time for Peter Cooper, and how did he use it, if at all, right? So,
Like his branding.
yes, exactly.
Yeah.
How was the branding for the time, right?
Well, you did some research on Bromangelon, which and Jell-O, and early branding of similar products. So if you want us to go first.
Well, yeah, I mean, I'll just say that I really, really tried to find any sort of trademark for Peter Cooper's gelatin, right? The name, it's sometimes referred to as Peter Cooper's.
Can you bring back I want to show the thing.
The share screen?
Yeah.
Okay. Sorry,
it's sometimes referred to as, I interrupted you.
No, that's fine. Right. Yeah. So sometimes it's referred to as Peter Cooper's gelatin. You can see there on the left. Sometimes it's referred to as, what is it? Peter Cooper's pure gelatin, something like that. But regardless, I couldn't find anything in the Gazette about a trademark. I looked for that, and this logo and I also looked for the glue company because there's kind of similar branding for the glue product.
And they were selling out of the same, factories.
So I don't know if, like, obviously patents were really important to Pete, but I don't know how much trademarking was important.
And right. I don't yet have a sense of how much he was involved in the design and packaging. I say yet because it's something that I'm very interested in finding out and learning about, because they really do use his image a lot, as you can see in these examples. The box on the right is the only one that I have with a date on it. And that's just the patent date, the 1897. So we know this is well after his death. And I don't know how much or how little he would have wanted his own face on this product. I just don't know. What I do know is that when he was alive, what came with these boxes of Jell-O were little packets of recipes. This is just one example of the recipes, but they were packets of like 10 recipes that Sarah Bedell Cooper wrote. So she wrote like a recipe for lemon jelly, for wine jelly. So while we were researching this, we've been researching this for too long, frankly. Not because it's not fun, but because people aren't going to be that interested for that long. But we've been researching this for long enough that for our holiday party this year, for our holiday party this year, James made Sarah Cooper's recipe for wine jelly. It was pretty good. It's pretty low alcohol.
Yeah.
They weren't drinkers. They were Unitarian, religious folks.
Yeah.
But her recipes, I think, added this sense, or increased the sense of what you talk about, this sort of homey, this benevolence. Like, we're here to help you. Here's some ideas for what to do with this product. And it's a family business, and that continued to be true well after Peter Cooper's death. The family ran the glue and gelatin and iron manufacturing, and frankly, even the Cooper Union. The family were trustees. We still have a family member on the board of trustees. We're kind of a family business in a way. So
yeah, and I will say the recipes too, they continued to sell, which I think probably maybe even still in products today, like Knox brand, there's probably recipes with them, but they
like Toll House cookies with the recipe on the back. Everybody counts on that. Yeah.
But they continued to do that well throughout the history of this product's life. I mean, I found newspaper advertisements with Sarah Cooper's recipes, I think like at least through the 20s.
And another thing that I don't know that would be useful for me to know right now is how common this was at the time. Like, how were they sort of doing something new by distributing
pioneering, right? Yeah, were they pioneering that branding?
That I don't know.
Yep.
But
so along those lines, actually, I don't know if you guys can talk about this, but how did gelatin impacted the culinary scene at the time?
That's a good question. I think so. You mean like not just the kind of domestic cookery,
right?
Industrial scale cookery,
right,
but the kind of like public. Yeah, I mean, I like I was saying before, like aspics have always been an important part of Western gastronomy, right? And so I think there are things from at least slightly after this period that use. No, maybe it was around this period. Thinking what, like baked Alaska? Doesn't that have gelatin in it?
No.
Yeah.
No, it doesn't.
No, it's ice cream.
Oh, thank you. Yes.
So I could speak to this a little bit.
Oh, great. Thank you.
So, you have to think about the elegant tables of the 18th century, where there would be a plateau on a dining room table, and they would have centerpieces and baskets of fruit and nuts. So at the high end, in the houses where people had servants and could go through the long process of creating things, they would make, so there were these very elegant molds. Wedgwood made them, Spode made them, where there was a almost looking like a pyramid in the middle.
Oh, yeah.
With a cone that went on the outside of it, and you would fill it with a gelatin material or a jelly. But it went through the type of process that you were talking about earlier, where somebody would spend days boiling, clarifying, extracting, removing so essentially the idea of having to clarify it. That's why the clarity of this is such a big deal.
Right.
And you would make this very elegant coating on this, and you would put it on your table, and guests would be so impressed by the workmanship of your staff in terms of being able to present this. So fast forward to the fact that this was in a box and accessible.
Mhm.
So what I can say is, if you go back to the recipe that you had up,
Oh, yeah.
that is very similar to what you would see in a box of essentially gelatin, like Knox. So this is the idea of, you add the sugar, you add the flavors. So that's why it's spelled out the way it is, as opposed to when you start getting into the Jell-O idea, it is the powdered gelatin, but it's also all of the other ingredients in powdered form. So what it did is make something that was only accessible to the very wealthy, accessible to the masses. So people were then making all sorts of gelatin molds in Victorian times for their table, as the middle class had this same accessibility that only the very, very wealthy had previously.
I love that. Just that image. Like, look at all my Jell-O molds.
Exactly. Look at the elegance of it.
Yeah.
So I did also want to make a comment about this idea of the patent possibly being on the box.
Mm.
So one of the things that occurs when you're dealing with products is multiple patents can cover a single product. And it's not uncommon, especially in food packaging, because the area where I worked for many years, we would deal with the packaged products, food composition, processes for making, all sorts of different aspects of this. So it would not be out of the realm of possibility that that is really directed to the box, because it is part of what is being presented, what is being sold. So that
Yeah.
is always a possibility.
Yeah. Yeah.
So think of it as being the combination of everything. So it's good that you did the trail that you did, of looking up this sort of thing.
It was
I
like a
did
dog
want to
with
kind of
bones.
say, the funny part is that when we deal with food from a patent perspective, we can deal with food in packaged. So one of the things that you may not think is a big deal now, but many years ago, when you went to go buy lettuce, you had to clean it. You had to deal with it very quickly. It didn't last. Over the last 20 years or 25 years, we've seen a big change in how salads and salad greens are packaged. That is all because of the technology of what goes into the packaging materials and the process as to how it's packaged. It's atmospheric packaging. So the bag of salad is mostly based on the package and the atmosphere in it. And so if you saw a patent number on a bag of salad, that could be related not so much to the contents, but to the packaging material and how it was processed.
That makes a lot of sense. Yeah.
So, because early on in my career, what I mostly did was packaging materials. And so I would do this type of heat shrinkable packaging specifically directed towards poultry, or a heat shrinkable packaging that was used on specific types of vegetables. We're dealing with packaging for cheese. And one of the things that people don't realize is that for living matter, like vegetables or salad greens, that it needs to be able to breathe. So the packaging is breathable. as is certain types of cheese packaging. It has to let out the carbon dioxide that is given off by cheese. But they're
Yeah.
completely different packaging materials.
Like coffee, right? That's one of the main, we can get whole bean coffee these days because of the one-way valve, right? In the package.
Yeah, because they're and these sorts of things, and also, but think of like meat, and you go, oh, I'm going to wrap this meat up. Well, meat needs an oxygen barrier, which is very different. So the packaging that bacon comes in is very different than the packaging that cheese comes in. And this is one of the fundamental things that very few people appreciate, is that all of these different plastic packaging, when it's directly with food, is specifically coupled to the type of food, so that it helps the preservation.
That makes sense. Yeah,
So-
the package is important.
So the other thing I was going to kind of mention, and this is just kind of interesting, is that when you talk about gelatin, in this instance, we're talking about collagen, protein, and that's why it's so related to what goes on with glue. And, the idea of an animal glue or this particular material as being the same thing. But as you go from one direction going to glue and the other direction a food product, you're adding sugar, you're adding flavorants. With respect to glue, you may be adding completely other things if you need to add anything. You might actually be adding something that prevents an animal from eating it, so a mouse won't come and eat the glue from something. So you may be adding very unpleasant things. Same thing happens with chewing gum. Chewing gum is a rubber, and very often the fundamental compositions for chewing gum are very similar to tires, but they go off in completely different directions. And the same idea as what you're dealing with respect to this idea of gelatin and glue, there's an analogy in chewing gum and rubber compositions for tires.
Great, Donald, I need to ask you a question because I've never met anyone who might know this answer, but you might. Is it true that if you swallow a piece of gum, it lives in your stomach for 7 years?
Well, depends on the gum, but I think it just comes out the other end.
Yeah.
Okay.
I would guess that it comes out the other end, but I don't think it is. I don't believe it's digestible.
You're the most expert gum person that I've met.
Yeah, we did have. I could check on that. I have one of my former examiners was the gum expert.
Oh,
but
cool.
I will tell you that we did have a number of patent applications for biodegradable gum. And one of the reasons why we had that wasn't what you're talking about. It was more so that when people chewed gum and like spit it out and left it on the sidewalk, or in any exterior surface, that it would break down, because normal polymeric materials that are now used for gum don't tend to break down. They're fairly stable. So this whole idea was to then have something that would break down, or that nature would break down over time.
It would change the look of New York City sidewalks.
So I do have one last question for James and Mary. And although I think I know the answer to this, I would like to ask you directly, what do you think is Peter Cooper's most important contribution? And while you answer that question, I'm gonna eat the gelatin that I made following Sarah Cooper's recipe. I made them both. So feel free to, in the last minute.
I love that you did that.
Yeah, me too.
His most important contribution. I mean, we might have two totally different opinions. So I'll give mine really quickly. And mine, could change over time. But today, my feeling about his most important contribution is this school where I work, the Cooper Union, and the idea that higher education can be free, which is something like we struggle with as a nation now all the time. The cost of tuition is so bananas. And the idea that it can be free and that it should be free, his Abram Hewitt, who we've talked about, said education should be free as air and water. And that's so beautiful to me.
Yeah.
That I love it. I hope we can get there.
Yeah, I think I'd probably have to agree. I mean, my first thought was maybe the elevator, right? Or
He didn't invent the elevator.
no, he invented it, but we built the first elevator shaft, right?
In New York City. Yeah, our building has the first elevator shaft in New York City, but alas, not the first elevator because he made it a round shaft. And the first elevators were square.
Or square, yeah. Or the Tom Thumb, right? Which is important for
The rocking cradle's pretty rad.
Yeah, but that, like, did that really have a future?
Sorry, I'm
Yeah.
I'm infringing on your favorite.
No. I'm just thinking about things that have kind of pervaded.
Yeah, the Tom Thumb really set the stage for trains to be
Yeah, for
like
steam-
huge in the United
Yeah.
States.
Yeah, and probably a whole lot of work in the steel industry that we don't talk about near.
No,
near
yeah,
the
it's
cabinet.
true. Yeah.
But yeah, I think even after all of that, I think I'd agree with Mary that I think the Cooper Union, even for him, Mary said this before, for Peter Cooper, like this was kind of his most beloved project. And it's really representative of him, that kind of like giving
And not in a like, look at me being so generous way, but like, of course, this is what
yeah.
this should exist, of course.
I don't think we mentioned this before. Did you mention this before, that Peter was himself uneducated?
I did, but briefly. Yeah,
Yeah.
he only had one full year of education, formal education
Yeah.
in his whole life. So the fact that he was able to patent so much stuff and found so many businesses and create a school is amazing.
And the fact that he really, unlike a lot of the maybe comparable industrialists today who pride themselves on leaving college and stuff like that, he really thought school was really important and felt like he missed out from not being able to do it because he was not, because he couldn't afford to do it when he was younger. And the fact that he thought that that was important enough to make that part of his life's work, and that lineage still exists today, I think that's really significant.
That was maybe more than you were asking for.
Yeah.
No, that's perfect. That's beautiful, honestly. I want to thank you, James and Mary and Donald as well, Larry, for joining us today and give us all this information, wonderful information. And I'm going to butcher this, but you, Mary, started this conversation saying one thing, and I think we can end it like this. Something that Peter Cooper said himself. I saw a lot of difficulties with this process, and I thought I could improve it. And it was something along those lines. And I think that is the spirit of entrepreneurship and the spirit of invention. Having gone out there and meeting so many entrepreneurs, so many inventors out there, that is the one thing that I will say you see in common. They see a problem, they see innovation, and they said, I can make this better, and they go and make it better. So I want to leave all of you guys that are listening here today with that idea that, hey, if you find a problem, you think you can make it better, go ahead and do it, just like Peter Cooper did. And maybe you'll get a patent yourself one of these days.
Yay to that. Thanks, guys. This has been a real pleasure.
Excellent. Bye.
Bye.